So can I just start this video off with an apology? I had no intention of taking this long to get my first major video of 2017 out, but between work, life, and that lovely little curse I like to call procrastination, well, it took me this long to get my first major video of 2017 out. I'm gonna try my hardest to get out of the habit for the remainder of the year, but I make no promises. And I should probably stop rambling and get to talking about the topic at hand. It's why most of you are watching this after all. The more I think about it, the more I realize how essential levels really are in forming a game, even more so than other game tropes talking about a lot of countdowns like boss fights or characters. They're arguably the most prominent glue used in sticking a video game all together, which means that level design is very much an important part in making or breaking a game. And here I present some examples of levels that certainly do well at their job in my opinion. Whether the level's atmospheric, visually stunning, or simply just a fun level to go through, a lot can come into play for what I like in a level, so there was definitely a lot to pick from. But despite this, I managed to narrow it down to my 10 favorites. Hey, if I'm able to make a list about my 10 favorite games and have the order remain about 90% the same a year later, anything's possible. Of all the gaming related things that occurred to me last year, easily the biggest surprise was me getting into a freaking shooter of all games. But leave it to Blizzard to win me over with good old Overwatch. One of my favorite elements of the game is definitely the game's beautifully animated visuals. The Pixar comparison is made for a reason. And because of this, it's pretty difficult to find a level in the game that you could call visually dull. Even something as basic as a desert temple still has enough to it that it's not boring to look at. So picking a favorite area in Overwatch really comes down to two things: your taste in setting, and which of the match types you like the most. In my case, my favorite match type is Control the Point, and one of my favorite things to look at are cities at night. And what a coincidence, Lijiang towers both of those. In hindsight, Lijiang Tower isn't anything too complex. Like the other Control the Point maps, it consists of 3 separate rounds where you have to, well, control the point, by capturing it and then keeping it under your team's possession for a long enough period of time. And it's not like Lijiang Tower is the only capture the point map in the game, there's quite a few of them, and all of them are well constructed in regards to level design. So really, my preference for this map mostly comes down to the presentation. And my, that's some mighty fine scenery! It's set in a Chinese metropolis, with the maps consisting of a garden, a night market, and the tower control center. And all 3 of these areas provide some wonderful eye candy that never grows boring to look at for me. To put it simply, there's a reason Lijiang Tower was the go-to map for the Lunar New Year event's Capture the Rooster mode. Actually, that'd probably be because it was for Chinese New Year and Lijiang Tower is located in China. I like my theory more. So, who's ready for some ramblings from a guy who clearly still has his nostalgia goggles on for Sonic Adventure 2? I mean, I won't deny the game certainly hasn't aged well, but that won't stop me from loving it. And in my opinion, it still holds what I consider to be the best way to handle 3D Sonic levels. While not perfect all the time, the Sonic and Shadow levels usually did their best to provide a balance of both platforming and the series' trademark focus on speed, not just one or the other. And lo and behold, these levels were easily the best in Adventure 2, with the best of the bunch being, in my eyes, Green Forest. Now, when playing through Adventure 2 for the first time, the first thing you'll probably notice about this level is the time limit. And understandably, you might be a bit skeptical upon seeing that, especially if you've been through the Dark story already. But rest assured, unlike with Security Hall, 8 minutes actually is plenty to beat the level. Not to mention, once again, unlike with Security Hall, it makes sense why not beating the level in time will result in a death. Since, you know, island destroying bomb is kind of a thing. But yes, the level is concise enough that even if you're struggling with the level, you should still have enough time to reach the end. And hey, you got a fun stage to go through in the meantime. Like I said earlier, it perfectly balances the 2 key elements behind the Sonic series, with plenty of times for you to go fast, while also having some good old 3D platforming moments. But why is Green Forest the best in my opinion? Well, honestly, it's less of one major element standing high above the rest, and more so everything coming together in the level so well that it tends to be the stage I return to the most. In other words, I just have the most fun playing through it. Dare I say it, it's a total blast. I am so sorry for that. Considering my love for Crash Bandicoot Warped is so strong, with it being my favorite game and all, I think it was pretty safe to assume there'd be a level from it on this list. Though the real challenge in this choice comes from which level to pick, because Warp's lineup of levels is certainly a strong one to say the least. It certainly does a good job at making each level stand out from one another, even when they reuse time periods. And honestly, much of one's reasoning behind their favorite can be behind which time period they like the most in the game. And, writing up what I said about my love for lit up cities, it's pretty fitting that my favorite time period in the game is the futuristic city. Though when it came to choosing between Future Frenzy and Gone Tomorrow, it was surprisingly pretty easy. Future Frenzy requires backtracking to 100% it, and backtracking's not the greatest of experiences in Warped. Gone Tomorrow does not require backtracking, so we have a winner. Though even with that out of the picture, I still do find myself enjoying Gone Tomorrow more. As the first level of the final world, it's where the difficulty starts to show its full potential, requiring you to be at your best and to know each of Crash's abilities inside and out, which is certainly a fun challenge. It even gives you chances to be experimental with your abilities and how to use each of them together to their fullest. And of course, the level setting is just that panning shot of the city where you're being transported between sections never stops looking fantastic to me. I can only imagine how it's going to look in the PS4 remake. Don't expect to hear from me that day. So, is it safe to talk about Undertale now? Oh yeah, by the way, spoilers for Undertale. Skip to the time on screen if you want to avoid them. I mean, it has been a year and a half since the game came out. I'd say the overflowing hype has at least calmed down enough to not have any mention the game make someone want to do terrible things. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, even despite this kinda crazy reputation it's earned in the past while, I'd say that playing through Undertale at least once is something I'd recommend doing. Though I will say, if you do end up playing through Undertale, I'd recommend going for the true pacifist ending. Not because I guilt trip you for killing Goat Mom like a majority of the fanbase would, but more because arguably the best area in the entire game is only accessible in the true pacifist ending. That being the true laboratory. Talk about a complete tonal shift. I was just having a heated discussion with a lesbian fish in a dump about if anime is real or not, and now I've just been thrown into an RPG Maker horror game. Don't do this to me, Toby, that's very inconsiderate. But yeah, the True Lab is by far the most unique section of the game, if only for the eerie atmosphere it gives throughout. Well, that and for how much connect the dots this level plays. With Alphys' journal entries about her research quite literally on display, a lot of unanswered questions from Undertale's lore get answered, but not without creating a few new questions just in time for the game's finale to sew up. Heck, I'll even admit that this level made me feel pretty sympathetic for Alphys, a character I didn't find myself liking for majority of the game. But if you need a bit more to your level than a spooky setting and lore dumps, that's fine. The True Lab's also got these Eldritch Abominations! These are the results of Alphys' experiments infusing monster souls with the human soul's power of determination. And to put it simply, it didn't go very well. Though it does make for some of the most memorable standard enemy encounters in the game. Not quite on lesser dog levels, mind you, but the point still stands. Is it wrong to pick a Mario Kart track as my Mario rep for a favorite levels list? Considering how creative the levels in the Mario platformers can get, especially in the 3D ones, I feel like the answer to my question is yes. But honestly, with how incredible some of these tracks are, can you blame me? Especially when they're able to take some great ideas from the platformers brought to the table and expand on them. Example? Tick-Tock Clock from Mario Kart DS. Also known as, let's take the best level from Mario 64 and turn into a Mario Kart track, but amplify what we do with its setting to heights that we didn't even know were possible. Much like its platformer counterpart, Tick-Tock Clock takes place entirely inside the mechanisms of a giant clock. And man do they use this setting to its fullest. Between the clockwork sound of the music, the rotating clock hands and swinging pendulums, and even a portion that involves driving across giant rotating gears, not a single element of this idea is underused. It's certainly one of the most standout tracks in the Mario Kart series, that's for sure. But you know what's better than this Mario Kart DS classic? The remastered version in Mario Kart 8. Aside from the visual overhaul, we've now also got some of the later series mechanics incorporated through an optional glider section above the gears, and just, they made the already great music even greater. Hold on, I think I need to recuperate. Give me a minute. A level archetype I really think needs to be appreciated more are levels that are themed around music. They tend to be some of the most creative settings in the games they appear in, and many of them are just really fun. Especially when they go one extra step by putting the music element of the level not in the visuals, but in the structure. Let me put it this way. 2D platformers should take a page out of Donkey Kong Country Returns book more often. While not necessarily having a full-fledged music theme in regards to the level setting, though one could argue the drum-like platforms would count, the key element in music madness that makes it so fun comes from the fact that the level moves at a rhythm. Literally every piece of the stage goes to the beat of the song. From the moving platforms, to stage hazards turning on and off, to the slamming of the giant mallets, literally everything aside from you and the enemies. This is bound to be a level that any music student would love. And for those who don't deal with rhythms on a frequent basis, the song also includes a very noticeable clap throughout to help show the rhythm pattern for the player, so everyone gets to join in on the fun. Though much like the rest of the game, it ain't afraid of making you happy that getting lives in this game is really easy to do, especially since this is the second last world of the game. Hey, this is Donkey Kong Country. Mercy is a non-existent term here. Building off the whole thing about levels based around rhythm that we talked about last segment, we now find ourselves at Rayman Legends. I hadn't actually played this game until the start of this year, and I'm honestly so glad that I did. And while the game as a whole was fantastic, the music levels were what sold this game for me. With the fast pace, perfect sense of rhythm, wonderful visuals, and fantastic music pieces behind them, these levels were easily the best portion of the entire game. And to be quite honest, picking a favorite from these may have been the hardest choice for this entire list. But after thinking about it long and hard, I finally decided to go with what I consider to be the most insane in the music levels, barring the 8-bit editions. And just from title alone, you can already get why I say this. Alright, so you don't actually do any dragon slaying in this level, but this is certainly a fine alternative to it. Just off visuals and music alone, Dragon Slayer has gotta be the craziest these levels get. Swarms of dark creatures, waves of fire and lava, running and jumping across the backs of dragons, and all of this being played with a rock cover of the Trust song Antisocial serving as the tune for the level to go by. Granted, I can't say I've heard of Antisocial or Trust before this, but to those who have, well, Ubisoft's got something for you. Between the insane music and the equally insane scale and level design, Dragon Slayer was easily the most memorable level in the entire game. And best part is, once you've mastered the level, you can go at it again later in the game with an 8-bit rendition and pixelated screen. Who comes up with these ideas? You can thank me later. So let's return to the realm of the filthy casuals to talk about what many people consider the high point, and to some the only good point, of Fire Emblem Awakening's story. Not too long into the game, the Plegian King Gangrel decides he's in the mood for war and declares against Ylisse, the kingdom of our heroes. Ylisse's ruler Emryn, who's also the older sister of Protag Chrom, tries to speak with the Mad King about it, but is instead captured and sentenced to public execution. Chrom and his army try to fight back, Gangrel's forces manage to gain the upper hand, and Gangrel makes an offer. Give up the all-powerful Fire Emblem, or Emryn gets axed. Literally. The game does let you make the choice, but no matter what you do, you'll get the same result. Emryn ultimately makes the choice for you by falling off the cliff and taking her life. And while Gangrel laughs off Emryn's sacrifice, you get to see the effect of it firsthand in the following chapter. Now, on a gameplay standpoint, there's nothing particularly standout about the chapter renewal, but on the flip side, the atmosphere is one unlike any other point in the entire game. Unlike most games which give you a chance to breathe and take in a major character's death, Renewal throws you right back into the fray against Gangrel's troops, letting those thoughts seep in while you play through a much more somber and overall more melancholy battle. It's not even exclusively a feeling on your side. The game makes it pretty apparent that the Plegian soldiers are only fighting this battle out of obligation. None of them really want to fight this war anymore. It's easily the most effective point of Awakening's plotline, showing the ultimate turning point of the game's first arc, and the fantastic music only emphasizes this. And it leaves for a great setup to the arc's conclusion in the following chapter, providing the perfect opportunity to finally put Gangrel in his place. Certainly worth it in the end. While this is definitely up to debate, if you ask me, the most important part of a game would easily be the beginning. You could argue that ending on a high note would be more important, but I'm more to the mindset of, if you don't get my interest early on, you're gonna have to try really hard to keep me playing. So first levels in a game are something I personally think should have a lot of thought and effort put into them. Not necessarily more so than the rest of the game, but certainly not notably less so. And when it comes to good first levels that hook your interest, I always find myself turning back to Final Fantasy VII's opening dungeon as an example. Now, I'm not saying that every game needs to open with a power plant bombing, though it's certainly a good way to get the player interested in what's going on, that's for sure. But aside from that, the Sector 1 reactor serves as a near perfect way to introduce the player to Final Fantasy VII, both in regards to gameplay and story. It provides some insight into our party's conflict against the corrupt Shinra Corporation, gives a brief, effective look into two of the game's main characters and what they're like, and best of all, it's not pulling you through the park on a leash! It gives you plenty of time and space to learn the game's mechanics before it brings you to a major enemy, but never does it hold your hand or shove tutorials down your throat. Heck, the game barely does that as a whole, even with mechanics introduced later on in the game. I will admit that I'm not too fond of the dungeon boss, but even then that's more due to the grammatical error made during the localization that can make one portion of the battle confusing, but aside from that, I don't think I could think of a better way to open up such a great game, though it appears Square Enix might have done so. All depends on how the FF7 remake turns out, but only time will tell on that one. Very few things feel better in a game than going through a notable low point only for it to be followed by an exceedingly high point. It definitely helps get rid of the pain left from the bad, and also helps you appreciate the good that much more, since it's far better than what you've just been dealing with. Take, for example, Dust and Elysian Tale. I may love this game to bits, but Chapter 3's Sorrowing Meadows, fittingly enough, can go die. It's a long, repetitive, and overall tedious portion of the game, and the enemies present in it are among some of the worst in the game by far. Not to mention, in regards to the overarching plot, Chapter 3 provides literally nothing to the table. It's completely a filler chapter. So understandably, upon finishing up the Sorrowing Meadows, I wasn't really too happy about the state the game had put itself in, which made entering the Blackmoor Mountains for the first time all the more amazing. I'm not even exaggerating when I say this, the first time I played through Dust and got to this level, I was legitimately speechless. Like, this is beautiful. Dust already has a gorgeous art style as it is, but this is by far where it's at its best. Though don't worry, there's a lot more to like about the Blackmoor Mountains than just the pretty visuals. As this game is very much a Metroidvania, and being one of the game's final levels, the Blackmoor Mountains is quite a large level, quite possibly the biggest in the game, meaning it's got a plethora of secrets, puzzles, and waves of enemies to cut down. And these enemies are no slouch, they certainly can take more hits than the ones from earlier areas, but unlike the Sorrowing Meadows, it's not cheap and there's no annoying gimmick behind how to defeat them. They simply hit hard and require you to be on your toes at all times. The level design's not too shabby either. together, with icicle-coated caverns, which contains the fabled double jump power-up, avalanche-heavy hillsides, and even a fun little platforming puzzle hidden away in the level. Though aside from the strong level design and satisfying combat sections, there's another major element behind why the Blackmoor Mountain is my favorite, and that comes right at the end. It's at the top of the mountain where an abandoned village can be found, which contains the game's biggest turning point in its story, the reveal of Dust's identity. I'm not gonna spoil it here, but I will say I wasn't fully expecting the answer I got. Much like with levels before, there's not one part of the Blackmoor Mountains that makes it my favorite level, but more so every part of it coming together so perfectly to make an exceedingly memorable part of the game. From the visuals, to the design, to its relevance to the story, it's got everything I could ask for all in one extravagant package.